Asking for the engagement, what many call closing the engagement, is the process of moving the buyer from acknowledging your capabilities to engaging you for those capabilities. In this lesson, you'll learn several closing techniques that you can use to encourage prospects to engage you. After reviewing this lesson, you'll also understand that closing is a process and that very often you will attempt to close the engagement several times in your discussion. Let's get started. Sales discussions follow a common path. The path starts when you engage the buyer in a discussion. It progresses further by asking questions that probe for the buyer's needs and the conditions. Once you understand their needs and conditions, you can suggest solutions. If the buyer likes you and the solutions they hear from you, they'll signal their interest in working with you. As you learned, signs of interest are buying signals, and when you recognize interest, you can begin to close the engagement. Think of closing as the process by which you help the prospect move towards signing an engagement. A close is an agreement to take the step toward working together. Having command of several closing techniques is important since you will likely need several different types that you can use throughout the conversation. Okay, let's talk closing techniques. The first one to learn about is the assumptive close. You've taken time to clarify the prospect's needs, you've probed for additional needs that you may have missed, and you've presented your solution and the benefits to the buyer. Along the way, you confirm your mutual understanding of the expected outcomes and have gained the prospect's agreement. If you've done this, the assumptive close is very easy. To use the assumptive close, simply clarify the next step that would occur to seal the deal. For instance, you might say, "I'm glad we seem to have an agreement on the litigation strategy. I'll send an engagement letter over to you this afternoon so I can answer any questions that you might have before the weekend." With an assumptive close, you don't ask if you can do the work. You simply have the engagement and proceed with this belief accordingly. By assuming the next step, the buyer must either agree or object. If they have already been agreeing with you, the assumptive close usually works. The suggestion close is a little softer approach, but is still similar to the assumptive close. It too follows naturally once you recognize buying signals, but instead of assuming the next step, you suggest the next step and ask if that next step is acceptable. For instance, you might say something like this: "I'm glad we've had a chance to get to know each other. I think we'll work well together. I'll suggest we meet for breakfast in the morning to review our engagement letter. Does that work for you?" The options close is just that. You give options for the buyer to choose from, two alternative ways to begin the engagement. Either way will move the engagement forward. In that way, it too is like the assumption close. Giving the prospect the control of which option works better for them gives them control of the next step, but keeps the conversation focused on an engagement of your services. You could say this: "I know you'll agree with me that time is of the essence in this matter. Would you like us to run a conflicts report first or send over the engagement letter first?" Another options close could be as simple as, "Would you like me to bring the engagement letter over for you to sign, or would you prefer to come to my office and meet some of the people that'll be working on this matter with you?" Simple, right? Another version of the options close is the good, better, best close. You aren't limited to just two options. You may have three options that you can use to ask for the engagement. Three options can be a powerful tool when they are framed as good, better, and best options. The psychology at play in this scenario is that people tend to select the better option because they rarely want the good enough option and tend to avoid the best option. Frame your options accordingly. Make sure the better option is the option that you can live with. With the good, better, best close, you might say something like this: "I'm glad we agree that this problem needs to get resolved quickly. I can start by reviewing the files and giving you my thoughts on them." Or a better starting point would be for me to talk to your CEO after reviewing the files so we have a better plan of action for moving forward. Of course, the best option would be for me to have the authority to handle this situation so you can get back to your real job. But I'm sure you want to keep your eye on things. Which way would you like me to proceed? Let's review our last closing technique, the summary close. The summary close can be used when you want to summarize the key points of information and pivot to a close after having reviewed those facts or key points. If you have observed agreement in the key points, reviewing them reinforces them in the buyer's mind. Begin with small, easy tasks that are sure to get their agreement. Then build to the larger, more strategic points of agreement. Get a confirmation after each point. By summarizing the key points, you're building agreement or a yes habit. You can also review the process you'll follow and get agreement on each step of the process. Once you've summarized what you've discussed, ask, so does that provide a good summary of how we can move forward on this? If the answer is yes, you can add, I'm glad we're on the same page. Let's get to work. I'll have my assistant send you over our engagement letter. There's one more way to close the engagement that we haven't discussed so far, and that is to simply ask for the work, not in a begging or pleading way, but simply to say you'd like to work with them and ask if they'd like to work with you. Asking for the sale can be as simple as a heartfelt request, such as, I'd like to help you with this matter. Would you like my help? Or, I would love to work with your group on this. Would you let me be part of your team? This closing technique works best when it's delivered with humility and sincerity, but it's hard to say no to this question if it's delivered authentically. We've reviewed 4 very effective ways to close an engagement: the assumptive close, the suggestion close, the options close, and the fun variant, the good, better, best close, and the summary close, and of course, the bonus closing technique, the ask close. But you're not done with this lesson yet. You have to practice these closing techniques. It's important that you get comfortable with asking for and closing the engagement. The best way to do this is to role play an engagement conversation with someone else. Have your partner play the buyer and you play the seller. Set up a situation and pretend you're trying to close a deal. Start from the beginning of the conversation and practice asking questions, watching for agreement and buying signals, and moving into the close. The more you do this, the more it'll become comfortable for you. The more comfortable you get, the more confident you'll be, and your closing rate will increase as a result. Well, that wraps up our lesson on closing questions. Thanks for watching.